Hello. In this video I'm going to be talking about the energies and communication and also the geometry that is happening through the central nervous system. So if we look at the first picture, we have the cells of the central nervous system in the cranial fluid, in the water, 99% water. And then minerals, glucose, salt, oxygen. And the cells swim in this environment, and the oxygen, the salt, the glucose, minerals, they are substance for the cells, and the water is the environment. It's the environment they live in, and also it is the means of communication. It's how the cells communicate. The neuron, the starfish cell there, it's got its axon coming out. This one is myelinated. Some aren't, some are myelinated, some are not. When they're not myelinated, the electrical charge travels down, or electrical pulses travel down the neuron, and a lot of this expands out from the axon into the fluid around and makes a sine wave around the axon. So it is travelling through the water as well as the axon. When this is myelinated, that doesn't happen. It stays within that unit. So I think some people see this as the membrane insulates the axon so the charge can't escape into the water, but I see it as the electricity is actually moving through the water in spirals through the water in the myelinated glial cell rather than around it. Either way, it doesn't really matter that much. But without the myelinated glial cells, the charges also move through the water. Neuroscience for the last 100 years has been focusing on this energy, this electrical pulses that move from neuron to neuron. They connect in all sorts of patterns, and communication happens with this electrical charge. But now they're finding that the glial cells, the anemone type cell there, the astrocyte cells, the myelinated glial cells, the microglial cells, which are the little oval ones that are the immune system, these are intelligent and they communicate, but in a different way. The neurons, this is a bit like a landline. The electricity travels down the axon. But the glial cells are more like cell phones. They broadcast, and the information just travels out through the water. So a glial cell can be broadcasting something, and it will turn up in another glial cell somewhere completely different, where they're not connected. The information travels through the water. The scientists don't know how this information is being sent through the water. They can't see a electromagnetic wave or particles or anything that would make the communication. So they're talking about it as a sixth sense, as a knowing, as a happening, that they're communicating. And there's 20,000 times as much communication happening in this way through the fluid as a medium than through the neurons, which is also travelling through the water, because it's either travelling along around the axon in an unmyelinated axon, and within the water, within the myelinated glial cells when it's myelinated. And also, when we're looking at this, you've got to take into account that water is a medium for energy to travel through. The higher energies, as they come down through the top of the head, these will travel through the water. They'll use the water as a medium. The energies from the jhana chakra around the thalamus will use the water as a medium to travel through this system. The water within the myelinated glial cells, they'll use this as a medium. It's all 99% water. The water content is important, that it produces this very refined medium for communication. So as the myelinated glial cells travel down through the nerves, they're creating this environment, 99% water, that the electrical charge can move through, that the energies coming in, it's like a port. The whole central nervous system is 90% water, and the water within it is 99% water. It's like a port for receiving communication from the higher energies, from the jhana chakra, and also energies moving the other way, the kundalini rising up through it, and also that leaving out through the top of the head and communicating with the higher energies. This water is a medium for communication, it's a medium for spiritual energies receiving by us and leaving from us. Support. And so it's important to be able to get a holistic view of this whole system, where it's connected together in a way that this can travel through. So let's move on a bit. Just look at a bit of the geometry. In the next picture we can see the cerebrum, and you've got the two lateral ventricles which are in the cerebrum, and you can see the geometry of that, how they mirror each other, and the fluid in the ventricles is 99% water, the fluid in the whole of the cerebrum is 99% water, and the cerebrum with the cells and the whole content of it is 90% water. So it's a very aqueous area, and these ventricles are a bit like antennae for the energies to arrive in. If you look at the next picture, you can see the cerebrum with the nucleus in it. And again, you can see the geometry of that. I'm recording in nature, so you may be hearing helicopters and cars and people and things like that going on. But anyway, the cerebrum here surrounds the thalamus, and it looks a bit like a cell with a nucleus in the middle, and that is also very aqueous, 90% water, and the water within it is 99% water. So we've got these two areas, and again these lateral ventricles really look like little antennae for me for receiving information in a spiritual way, not through the axons or things like that, but in a spiritual way, receiving information in. And the thalamus is like the brain for the brain, it's a nucleus for the brain. But let's look at how the water escapes from this area. So you've got the cerebrum. In the next picture, the cerebrum drops down onto the brainstem, and this light blue area, this is the tentorium. So it can't just go straight through, it has to get around the tentorium where the brainstem comes up through the tentorium. There's a slight gap around that, so the fluid can come around that and down. It can also travel through the cells of the thalamus to travel down through, and the ventricles. It comes in the lateral ventricles into the third ventricle, then down the fourth ventricle, down the centre. So you've got the cerebrum there, and all of the fluid is coming together into this foraminae that the central nervous system is coming up through. So it's all coming together and then down through there. It's lovely geometry to these places. So that fluid comes down. Also the fluid comes out of the ventricles into this space around in this picture, the lower brain, down around the spine, and becomes food for the nerves. The fluid from the ventricles has still got oxygen, still got salt, it's still got glucose, and this can feed the nerves as they come out. And you can see the ventricle right down the centre of the spine. And another nice geometry is this one. Another place that is filtering water out of the blood is the kidneys. And you can see the ventricles at the top with this fine cord that comes down the spine, and that stops about the level of middle of the kidneys there. In a child it will come much lower, but in an adult that's about where it stops. So in a child it will come down almost to the bladder. And there you can see the symmetry there and how that makes a nice geometry of the ventricles and the water system there. It's just water. And the kidneys, the tubes coming from the kidneys, the bladder and the urethra, how they make a nice geometry together. Anyway, the fluid from the central nervous system and around the central nervous system flows off in these capillaries down through the nerves, and you can see how the fluid, and we've talked about how the fluid can move from one to the other and how they create their own fluid that is travelling through them and from the environment around them. So they create this lovely 99% water for the electrical impulse to move down the myelinated glial cells. The myelinated glial cells are much longer than I can draw. They're 100 times as long as they're wide, so they're much longer than this. But also this water can take, as it's slowly moving down, it's taking the memory of being in the Ajna chakra, being in the energy from the crown chakra, so it's taking that as a memory, but also these energies from the crown chakra, the Ajna chakra, and also the different chakras coming down the body are facing onto the spine, and all this can be absorbed into the water and can move off down through these cells. So it's quite important to have these images as we view this area, because the anatomy of the body is the sacred geometry of the body, and looking at the geometry of the central nervous system and nervous system, we are looking at the sacred geometry of that, and it has a special place. When you look at the geometry of the heart, you become imbibed by the quality of the heart. When you look at the anatomy and sacred geometry of the central nervous system, you become imbibed with the energy and placement of that. And the central nervous system is a lot to do with the intellect and the patterns of the intellect and our thinking process. It's also a lot to do with it's also a portal for the higher energies to come in and to leave. So all of this can travel off down through the nerves, and when we're looking at the geometry of this, we're becoming in contact with that part of ourselves. So the image you hold is important, and the water flowing through is important, and that this can take the energies. Okay, so that is it flowing off down through the nerves. And in the next one, this is just the water within the myelinated glial cells. For me, this has a very meditative quality to it. For me, when I was painting this one, not only I was thinking, well, actually this is maybe the first time this is being painted, because it's just showing the fluid. It's not showing the membranes. But also it has a very transcendental quality to me. The water content is what is connecting to these energies. If you imagine water flowing through your body, it receives light. And this picture it's a bit like the geometry of it. It's a receiver of some kind. And it seemed to be, in me, that transition between the intellect, and as you rise through the different levels of the intellect and different types of thought or communication, until you rise out through the energies rise out through the top of the head, and that energy turns into the connection to the higher self. It's a bit like the spiritual realm, or the top part of the intellect is the connection to the spiritual realm, and you can move in and out between that. And to me, this picture kind of represents that. It's where the spiritual energy is coming in, and then these spirals is where it can connect to the physical, and where the energy from the physical can connect to the spiritual and rise up. And very much, for me, not for everyone, this connection, this place where thoughts ebb away and it becomes into the higher self, and where you can drop from the higher self back down more into the intellect and into the body. And in the next picture you can see how this cell grows. It comes to a axon and wraps around and wraps around and wraps around and wraps around. And on the left hand side you can see as it wraps around each time it takes in more water. So you can see it's coiling around, and as it's coiling around all the time there's tight connections all the way around, so only water can come in, so it's attaching to the axon. So what is happening when we travel in along the axon, if we travel vertically down, there's this spiral into the middle, but that spiral extends out and down to the axon. So if you come in from the axon side, you're also having to spiral in to the middle. So let's look at this next picture, which again is just of the water, and you can see as you come in you have to spiral in, and it opens up into this chamber in the middle, and then it spirals out. So as the water flows through these myelinated gills, it doesn't just flow straight through, it spirals in. This creates an energy and opens up into the middle and spirals out the other direction. There's an energy, there's a movement, there's a wonderful geometry to these cells. Wonderful. Then in the next picture, the top semicircle is of the fluid sheet that is wrapping around the axon. There will also be a membrane sheet that is wrapping around the axon, and you can see at the bottom, at the top, the dotted lines across, each one of these is as it's wrapped around once. So each one of those, that's where the mauve line will be of the membrane. So as it wraps around, if you look at the area along the axon, there's a lot of water in the first one, and then in the next one there's less, and the next one's less, and the connections get closer and closer until you come to the outside where they're very close, and it's a bit more like a corkscrew. So there is a spiral in, but continually it's opening up like a vortex. As it comes in, it gets longer and wider as you come in through the, and then you come to the middle, and then it's a vortex going out the other way. So there's a lovely, lovely image and geometry to this, spiraling in and opening, spiraling out, and the vortex getting closer as it travels out. So that is that. The next picture, again, it's got this half circle, which is we're looking at the water, purposely drawing the water because there's a quality to it and the energies travel through it, and there's a meditative quality. It is, you have a different experience. When you view the water, you have one experience, you connect to that water in yourself. When you view the membranes, you have another experience, you connect to the membranes, and the water is like a medium. It connects to this very tranquil, etheric energy that is connecting to us through this port. So anyway, we have this water membrane that wraps around, and below it you can see the layer of water just on the surface of the axon, and you can see where the line, the bottom, the circular part of it, where this is joining, this is the membrane joining into the axon, and you can see where that is, and you can see how the middle bit, this has quite a large area, and then the two out bits further out, they're getting a bit less, and then a bit less, and a bit less, and a bit less, and then towards the outside it gets quite fine. But it's interesting to look at this, to see that actually, even though there's a lot of membranous connections to the axon, it is majorly just bathed in water. So there's a lot of water there. Now, the vectors that I've drawn in that top circle for me, and this may be correct or may not be correct, I really don't know. I've asked some scientists and I will change this video if they say different. But for me, this would be something like the vectors that the electricity would take as it leaves the axon. The semicircle bit, that is its connection to the axon, and my feeling is because it's coming up between the membranes, it will come out of that in 90 degrees, the same as the picture of the spiral that I showed. So it's coming out of the axon at 90 degrees, and then it's arcing up and then arcing back down to the axon and joining it at 90 degrees on the other half. So that's my feeling, how the electricity would move if it does travel through the water, and I think it does because it travels through the water when it's not myelinated, so I can't see why it won't travel around the water in the myelinated cell either. So I've drawn those in a way to give us a three-dimensional look of the cell. And if you look at the first picture, these are the first three vectors wrapped around the axon. I've charted them, I've done lots of little measurements, and this is what they would look like as they wrapped around the axon. You can see the electricity comes out, it spirals round to the middle, and then it spirals round the other way and out. And the next picture is of the next two of those vectors, and the last picture is of the middle two of those vectors. And if we look at those all together, they would all fit inside each other and make a three-dimensional image. So we get a three-dimensional image of the cell. And it's very interesting, the cranial fluid movement, or the water movement, is spiraling into the center and then out of the center. The electricity is going the other way, it's spiraling out at the center and then spiraling back in to the end. So they're complementing spirals, and how the universal energies or our energies flow backwards and forwards, I don't know. But I really think this cell should win a competition for the most fantastic geometry or fascinating geometry, the cell, and that it creates its atmosphere, it creates its own body of fluid within itself. There is it, and in another way isn't it. It's just the outside in a way, but it seals it in, and you get water geometry and you get solid geometry. And for me it's a bit like another aerial, or how all of these energies can come into one place and manifest and communicate together. These are just my thoughts on it and images on it, so how you view it is really up to yourselves, but the geometry and how they fit together is accurate. Anyway, thank you for listening. Okay, thank you.